Okay, so today we're going to talk about critical thinking and how we can promote that through online discussions. So we'll focus on a couple of things. First, we'll take a moment or so to think about what is critical thinking and how does that skill develop. And then we're going to zoom in on the discussion prompts and how we can manage conversations effectively. So many different definitions exist out there. This just happens to be one that I like, and you can read it here. I'll give you a moment to do so. So obviously we're trying to get to the top of Bloom's taxonomy, really, kind of engaging students in pretty high level thinking. So how do we make that happen? Well, I've put together the process of becoming the critical thinker, and you can see at the bottom there are 3 foundational conditions. One is they need to have knowledge. It's very difficult to critically think about something if you don't have a good amount of background knowledge in that area. So that's one. The next one is you need to believe in your ability to do that task, because the more you believe in your ability, the more likely it is you're going to persevere, especially if you run into any roadblocks along the way, which can certainly happen in the area of critical thinking because it's a challenging task probably. And then the third foundational variable is having desire and also that drive. So that's the motivational component. And it's essential that we have all of those foundational elements really met in order for us to continue along the process. The next layer is really focused on the learning environment, and this is where we have to craft creative, challenging learning tasks for students and also provide them with significant support. Once all of these elements are in place, then we can certainly see critical thinking happen in our students. So just a quick note about discussions. It's not the only place to learn. We do need to make sure that they have foundational knowledge before they come into a conversation. So you may want to do a narrated presentation. You may want to assign a reading, videos, things of that nature. So they're not going into a conversation cold. So what are some of the advantages of an asynchronous online discussion? Well, I think one of the biggest advantages is a time for reflection. In class, if a professor asks a question, you don't have much processing time. You're kind of expected to answer immediately. So you can kind of reflect, and you can reflect not only on your own thoughts, but also on what others have to say as well. You also have access to resources, so if you can think about something and you're like, I wonder what, and then go and dive deeper into the area so that you can know more about it before you respond. And writing really does help learning. So there's some research studies out there that show that the act of writing and putting things in your own words really does help you get and hold on to that new content. One of the other advantages of an asynchronous online discussion over an in-person discussion is that everyone gets to participate. And generally speaking in class, that's not the case. It may be 4 or 5 students carrying the conversation. Now, there are, of course, disadvantages also, and I think one of the biggest disadvantages is not getting immediate feedback. So you don't know whether your contribution is on or off target. So in class, if you're off task or not on the right track, the professor's probably going to jump in and correct you immediately. So you do get that more immediate feedback in an in-person conversation. In addition, emotional engagement could be a little bit reduced, as well as you may not feel quite as connected to other students, and sometimes conversations can become a little repetitive in the online environment. It's less so in the in-person environment. So it's interesting that critical thinking is more likely in online discussions. There's been some research that shows that it's easier this method is more likely to produce that outcome. Not that it can't happen in person, but their online environment really, it allows for it in a more easy way, because again, you have access to reflection time and access to resources and things of that nature. So I just want to go over a couple of different studies. Walker and colleagues found that by both reading and contributing to the discussion boards, you can increase your academic performance. So it's not just your contributions, but also when you read what others have to say. Now, in order to create a community of inquiry, there are several different factors you want to consider. So one is teaching presence. Where are you going to teach? It can be in a conversation. It can be outside the conversation, in preparation for the discussion, can happen afterwards, but you need to make sure that teaching presence is there. And social presence. Students want to know you're in the class and that you're reading what they're writing. They don't want to feel disconnected from you. And then, of course, the cognitive presence is more of that engagement factor. Are they thinking about it and feeling challenged and excited by the discussion? There's another way of thinking about online learning, and these are called the 3 E's, and Dixon put these together. And basically, you can see here experience, engagement, and evaluation. So again, what is the experience like? Have you built a sense of community? Do people know what the rules are for participating? Things of that nature. Engagement has to do with the content also. So how are they making connections to that material? Or what kind of formats are you using to really get students engaged and motivated to participate? And then evaluations, that feedback variable we talked about before, how it's really essential for students to know whether or not they're on the right track. Now, there are some things you can do before you even begin a conversation. So, for instance, you might want to put together a list of expectations so students know what it is that you are expecting from them when they participate in a discussion. Some faculty like to put certain number of word count, maybe others do a little bit more quality focus. Are you expecting them to cite outside resources, things of that nature. You can also provide them with a rubric, which will give them even more detailed information, and some faculty find that this is the best way to really communicate expectations. Either way, the goal is to really help students know what is expected of them during the conversation. Now, when you start off doing discussions, you may want to go like with a no stakes or low stakes model. So when they're beginning, let them learn from feedback before they are necessarily counted in the same way. This is particularly true, I think, at the undergraduate level for a student. Maybe it's their very first online class. So I always like to start with a getting to know you, kind of conversation that I usually don't grade at all, just to make sure everyone's comfortable with the platform. They know how to get onto the system and all the technology is working well. And it's a great chance for students just to get to know one another. Then you could also start with some low stakes where perhaps your initial assignments don't count quite as much as your later discussion prompts do. Again, so they have the benefit of participating without being penalized if they don't quite meet all of your expectations right from the start. Now let's focus in on question prompts because this can really be the make it or break it with discussions. When our question prompts are weak, so are the conversations that follow. So we definitely want to make sure we have strong discussion prompts. We want to think about a couple of things. Make sure it's not just a factual prompt. It's not like an assignment or a quiz because it really falls in a different place. It doesn't belong in a discussion. So discussion prompts should be open-ended. They should stimulate discussions and certainly encourage multiple perspectives. We also want to make sure that there's room for many contributors. So you don't want to do a prompt where after the first person presents their answer or response, there's nothing left for anyone else to contribute. So you want to set it up in a way that there's always ample room for others to make a significant and valuable contribution. So here are some guidelines I like to use, and I, kind of use this almost as a self-reflective tool as a teacher. I ask myself, does the question directly relate to my learning outcomes? Because again, it's supposed to fit into the overall picture. So I want to always go back and revisit my outcomes. Do the students have the right knowledge in order to be able to participate in this discussion? And if not, how am I going to get them that knowledge? Am I going to assign a reading, show them a website, do a video, whatever it might be? And then you want to see, like, are my questions high level where they're really integrating many different theories and concepts, or are they more simplistic and on the lower end of Bloom, which doesn't usually lead to a good quality conversation? You can also think about whether your question asks students to really delve into the text or other resources to be able to respond. Again, you want to make sure there's more than one answer. So usually discussions aren't about a right answer, but it's about looking at the evidence and sharing multiple perspectives. And again, the last one is making sure that others will have something to say, even if the first person to answer gives a really thorough response. So now once you've established your discussion prompt, it's important for you to think about your role in managing the conversation as it moves forward. So Grice actually has this kind of a theory that focuses on not just only the quantity, but the quality of the posts and the relevance and the manner. Let's take a closer look at this. So you can see here the quantity has to do with obviously how much information is being shared. quality is have we added to it? And this is a really important variable because we don't want students to just think that it's about a certain number of words or contributions in that way. And we also want to make sure that it's value added to the conversation, not just to the initial prompt, but is it flowing? Are they making references to things that other students have already discussed? Is it relevant? So making sure, again, that connection and that flow. It's not like this conversation's flowing and then this kind of comment from left field kind of jumps into the conversation. And of course, it should be done in a professional manner. If it's for an educational reason, such as a course, you certainly want to make sure students are still using good writing skills and whatnot while they're engaged in the discussion. So here's another study that was done that focused on self-efficacy. So students who believed in their ability to successfully participate in the online discussion were more likely to have more posts and make more contributions. So we want to keep that in mind because if you recall, we looked at the process of becoming a critical thinker, and self-efficacy was one of those foundational conditions. So we need students to believe in their ability. And that's where those low-stake opportunities in the beginning of the semester come into play. It's a really great way for students to build their confidence when they're not getting graded and feeling so judged about their performance. So the question always is how much should you be involved as the instructor? And this really varies based on the course and the situation, maybe even the time of the semester. But I'm going to share with you just a couple of different ideas and thoughts. There's definitely some evidence out there that speaks to your involvement does increase student involvement, but how much? So let's take a closer look at it. There are some folks out there, such as Thompson, who caution us because if we get too involved, it can intimidate students to feel like they don't have something as worthy to contribute, or they're not sure how it's going to be interpreted. So by you being too involved, it sometimes actually reduces student involvement. So we have to be cautious about that. This study done by Morris and colleagues really looked at how a moderate amount of involvement was best. When it was really small, like the first bar graph you see on the left-hand side, the ones on the left are the students, and the ones on the taller bars, I'm sorry, the ones on the left are the faculty, and the taller bars are the students. So when the moderator or instructor really didn't participate much, you can see students didn't either. When they participated a moderate amount, we had the highest level of student involvement. When they were really involved, they did not participate as much either. So again, this study suggests a moderate amount might be the best approach. In this particular study, they also looked at novice versus experienced instructors, and they found that more experienced instructors realized they need to be in the class making contributions. So, and that was linked to more student posts. Now, this was a really fascinating study because what this study found was that it may not be the actual number of posts that you make, but the amount of time that you as a faculty member spend in the class. Now, if you think about that for a minute, that makes a lot of sense because the quality of your posts are probably going to be higher if you've spent a lot of time reading and synthesizing what others are saying. So being in the class is really what matters most. Now, when you give a discussion, you want to try to get involved pretty early on because it could be that the conversation goes in the wrong direction or it is not following maybe the parameters that you set forth. So if you don't have a good, strong post in the beginning, you can see that other students will start to model after that weaker post. So you need to be able to step in and jump in and figure out how you're going to get them back on track. I usually like to give my feedback to the group as a whole so that all the students know that that post wasn't on track. Now, I don't do it in a way that's going to make a student feel bad. You want to be very cautious and sensitive to the fact that students don't usually like to get negative feedback. So we have to be cautious about how we deliver that feedback in a way that's not going to make them feel bad, but will help them do better on the next time. And of course, you can provide formative feedback to the class as a whole. So once in a while, I'll jump in and I'll just be like, wow, this conversation's off to a great start. Or I might be like, I'm watching the discussion and it seems like we might have gotten off target here. This is a good side conversation, but let's make sure we get back to the initial prompt that focused on whatever the topic was. And it's really a great way to A great way to help students know if they're on board is to positively reinforce them also in the group atmosphere so that everyone knows, yes, that's what you were looking for. So that was a great way to link the text to this outside research. And I love how you connected it back to what this other student said as well. That kind of feedback can really be helpful to students. So now we talked a little bit about how much you should be involved. Now we need to think about, well, how should you be involved? I love the Socratic question approach. So in addition to providing some feedback, you may want to also use Socratic questions throughout the process. I like to share these with students ahead of time, as you know, because I think this is a great way for students to also continue the conversation going. So it's not just for you, but also for students. One other trick that you might want to pick up on, when I first started teaching online, I used to just kind of throw almost like all my questions at once in the prompt, and then I didn't have anything else to really offer as the conversation went on, and it kind of came to a dead halt about midweek. And what I, decided to shift was I put the initial prompt, and then I would identify some potential follow-up questions. Some of those emerge naturally from the conversation, but there's also sometimes opportunities that other follow-up questions you would probably ask if it was an in-person class. So just hold those back in the beginning and just kind of scoot it into the conversation when it fits, so that when students are engaged in this conversation, they'll start to discover that it's not really just about the initial prompt, it's really about the whole conversation. And as it develops, they're going to dive into lots and lots of content in a pretty sophisticated way. Peers as moderators can be fabulous, but we really do need to make sure that you have support and scaffolding. So I certainly hope that you'll see that built into this course. And if you need more than what's already structured in, please reach out. And what we have seen in the research is that peer feedback and peer involvement as moderators can really increase student motivation and involvement. So it's great to get students involved in the process as well. So when you are figuring out how that teaching presence can find a way into the conversations, think about a couple of different ways. One is you can certainly correct any inaccurate content and reinforce accurate content, of course. So I think that's one role where you can kind of jump in and say, I usually jump in with a point of clarification. This is really the way this author, kind of intended for you to interpret that comment, and here's why, and back it up so that they can understand why. And you as the expert need to remember that you can make contributions and make links, and that's why when you go back to the more time you spend in the class, the easier it will be for you to bridge the different components together, make those links that may not be obvious to a student who is new to the field. One other way you can do it is through a summary post. Maybe at the end of the conversation, you might want to put together a kind of summary of everything that took place. That's a great way also. All right, so that's it for today. I hope that helps you with online discussion facilitation.